Good morning, gamers. I'm alive. Yeah, it's me, T1 Muir. Have you heard of GMTK Game Jam? It's a massive game jam hosted by the GMTK channel. And you know the drill. 48 hours to create a game on a given theme, all that stuff. I try to participate in at least one game jam a year, and this time was no different. I was prepared, freed my weekend, purchased a supply of Earl Grey tea, and escaped from the desert. You know, the basic stuff. In my time zone, the jam is split like this, though I had to leave at 12 on Sunday. So my plan was to come up with game ideas and basic mechanics during Friday evening, to finish the game during Saturday, and add the polish Sunday morning before I had to. I sat down in voice chat with the boys, waiting for the theme to be revealed, and it was basically something like a platformer where you control the level instead of the player, maybe a game where you're the boss instead of the player. And I think that's what a lot of people focused on, switching something with the player. You know me, I'm not like the other girls, and thought, what other roles can I reverse? A good genre for game jams is roguelite. They're very cost effective. It's pretty easy and fast to implement basic run randomization, granting nearly infinite replayability in comparison to a known roguelite game. Now if we look at the gameplay elements in the basic roguelite scheme, they are the player, the levels, the items, the enemies. As I said, I didn't want to involve the player, but I really liked the idea of reversing roles of items and enemies. Maybe during a run you collect party members, but have to fight them at the end? Or maybe items help the enemies as well? Or maybe you pick the enemies instead of the items, so instead of the player getting stronger, you would need to tactically pick enemy combinations that would be the easiest to beat. And that's how I came up with the core gameplay idea. For a while I wanted to try to make my own vampire survivors, and this would be a perfect fit. Though I still did need an idea for visual style and theming, something to give it personality beyond gameplay.
Like Among Us, but your inventory is sus.
Imagine like imagine actually like JRPG, but you need to vote out members of your party. Okay, something vampire survivor, something items or enemies. Think.
This reminded me. Couple of weeks ago, right after I released the last video, I was drinking tea and thought to myself, were there ever any games themed around tea? Well, I found like 3, but certainly this market needed more diversity. I started prototyping some sort of a tea game, but had no real direction and ended up scrapping it. This game jam was my chance to redeem myself. So yeah, the visual theme is also sort of a role reversal, with a teabag trying not to get brewed, if that makes any sense. By Saturday morning I already had basic controls and a couple of enemies down. When making jam games you want to explore your concept, while using a minimum amount of streamlined mechanics. Players at best will give your game 5 minutes, they have no time nor will to learn air shots, gun jumps and dash kills. That's something I learned the hard way from JSDJ. Sun Tzu said, all of the mechanics present must focus on exploring the core idea. In small jam games. That's why I made the player controls bare bones. Just basic walking and shooting, players can master them in under a minute. That leaves free space to experiment with enemy mechanics and interactions, which is the point of the game. I ended up making 8 enemy types, and each one of them serves a unique purpose. Let's go over them. Firstly, I made simple enemies to use as a baseline, basic cups and beefier mugs. Next, I wanted the game to actually have builds. like certain item combinations and synergies players would look for. In our case, we have enemies to choose instead of items, so we'll need to have enemy types that affect other enemies to make it make any sense. I added glasses that double your projectile, and chocolates that spill an AoE damaging puddle when shot. I also added a ranged enemy, which while trying to kill you can also deal friendly fire to his friends. And as well there's the martini glass, which sets projectiles and puddles on fire. These 4 enemies have crazy combinations between each other, allowing to make effective builds focused around each one of them, while also making the player feel smart and satisfied when they manage to combine their effects. Notice how all of those don't directly attack their brethren, but rather have their effects triggered by the player. If they did just attack each other, the game would be more like an RTS than a horde shooter, so I avoided it. Lastly, I also added 2 specialist enemies. Cardboard cups fly, thus avoiding floor hazards, and these metal coaster thingies, I have no idea how they're called, I've just seen them on trains in Russia. They ignore projectiles and can only be damaged by puddles or fire. Specialists have immunities, so they are much harder to defeat. This can feel punishing, but since you don't have to choose them, they're more so rewarding for the players that recognize their build's strength and weaknesses. So, how does the game work? Well, you have your base enemy wave, which is spawned around the player every 10 seconds or so. Between each wave, you can choose a card. This card will add enemies to your wave. So every wave you have an opportunity to choose what enemies you wanna add and which ones you wanna avoid. There's 16 cards total, and they're balanced in such a way that the more beneficial enemies are always paired up with some basics, so the game doesn't get too easy, while the harder enemies actually remove some basics from your wave. Even though on paper Martini is the best enemy in game, the cards that contain it add a bunch of cups as well. So you wanna choose them only if you're confident in your ability to utilize the Martini to get rid of those cups to make it worth it. By Sunday morning, the game is done. Only thing left is polish. Now we heard all about that a million times already, blah 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 screen shake, blah 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 particles, blah 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 game feel. Here's the game before polish. Here's after. I think that speaks for itself. I added a menu. Sear Vegetables suggested to call the game Boiling Point, which I found very fitting. Ben made some sweet music for the game. We didn't have time to make a separate menu song, so I just slowed down the original and that worked surprisingly well. And we're pretty much done. We created a brand new roguelite horde shooter where you upgrade the enemies instead of the player. What a nice elevator pitch. Or maybe not. Finally, the game was released on itch.io, and its fate was placed in the voters' hands. Most people make their devlogs before the voting is done, but I am sadly not that fast. On the positive note, we can discuss the results of the gem. These are the scores. First of all, let's point out that we're in the top 10%, which is great, no doubt about that. I do feel that the ratings might have been a bit harsher this year. I base this purely on my feeling that my JMTK 2019 and JMTK 2021 submissions were much worse, but received much better scores. But really I have no complaints. Placing top 20 was never my goal. Well, I mean it was, but it's much less important than the fact that I have created a new unique game to add to my portfolio. So yeah, this is the story of Boiling Point. I'm very happy with how it turned out. Of course you can play it right now on itch.io and subscribe to the channel and join the Discord and do all of that stuff. Thank you very much for watching, I really appreciate it. Love you, bye bye.